The street was pouring strong lies. We are shown a car in which a man in a black suit is sitting and talking on the phone. He spoke on the phone in bare feet. He did not understand why they needed an ordinary city museum. After all, there will not be a lot of money there. The boss ordered him to buy people without further ado, because they had to get this building. The boss promised to feed it to the fish in the sea if they didn't get the project. The man threw the phone away with a bored face, and was indignant that the boss simply could not tell the reason. He asked the driver to go get him coffee. The driver entered the cafe and ordered 1 coffee. The green-eyed man quickly fulfilled his order and set the coffee in front of him. The director, having tasted coffee, was indignant at its taste, and threw it out into the street right in front of the green-eyed boy. The guy ran outside and looked at the car going away and said, "I found him." He asked to leave early from work, for some important reason. He ran to the city art museum as quickly as he could. Running inside, he saw him, in a black tight-fitting suit, looking at the Albert statue sculpture and listening to the tour guide. She tells interesting facts about the works of the sculptor, which the beautiful man listens attentively. After finishing her story, she left the men in the hall announcing that Haru's exhibition hall would be completed. The man, whom the green-eyed one burned with his eyes, noticed this and said, "So you will drill a hole with your eyes? You see, you like it so much." He replied, "I just can't express how much I like it. What do you think?" To which he replied that he was not particularly strong in such sophisticated things, but he agreed that these were masterpieces. But from these works of art, he clearly understood that the sculptor was blown away from forbidden relationships with men. Green-eyed objected to the suggestion that only nudity is present in the work. He said that there is something more. The man standing next to him simply said that the only thing he sees is homosexual films for adults, and that it is not in vain that they say that such is inevitably drawn to such. The green-eyed guy tried to swing at him, but before he could hit, he was already brought to his knees by the guards watching his every move, to which he replied that he was an ordinary student. They did not believe him, and the man stood in front of him and said to explain his behavior. The green-eyed man told him that he liked him. He looked at him in bewilderment, and with a chuckle asked him to search. Searching, they found nothing suspicious, but he recognized his name as Matthew Rayner from a document from the university. Matthew studied to be a sculptor. His guards did not want to let Matthew go, but he ordered not to torture him anymore. Matthew apologetically left the exhibition hall, heading to the bathroom. Suddenly, the guard's phone received a call about canceling the meeting at the museum and rescheduling it for tomorrow, to which the guard was indignant, but the director himself, grinning, went to the toilet for Matthew, saying that he would also look at other exhibitions. When he went to the toilet, he found Matthew standing in front of the sink. He took him to a toilet stall and secluded him. It was Matthew's first time. Leaving the green-eyed man in the booth with a white substance on his face, he returned to the car. Matthew was at the lecture. He tried to listen to the lecture, but it didn't work out well for him because of the flood of memories from yesterday. He learned that the man's name was Jin. But then the lecturer pulled him out of his thoughts, shouting his name loudly and asking him to come to him after the lecture. After the lecture, he and the man sat in the office, and the lecturer was worried about Matthew. But then, putting personal affairs on the second shelf, he asked him how the search for the model was going, to which Matthew replied that he had not found it yet, but he had a person in mind. Very high hopes were placed on him because he was one of the best in the faculty. Famous galleries and representatives of foundations loved his creations. And at the upcoming exhibition, the lecturer will help to make his work in the spotlight. At that time, Jin Qingyu was in the museum building. He met with the head of O to discuss the construction of additional facilities for the art museum. They knew that they would not stay with this project, but they nevertheless took it on. They brought the head O a gift in the form of a golf bag filled with money. The leader promised to provide all possible assistance. They said goodbye and Jin left the office. The guard offered him a cigarette. Lighting a cigarette, he began to think about his agonizing thirst that was crawling inside him. He thought of the boy they'd taken to the closet with earlier, and thought he might be a good option to quench his thirst. He tried to remember what the name Matthew reminded him of, but images of a cozy person and the words "you must not forget this" appeared in his head. His head ached from the sharply flooded memories. His guards became worried. He abruptly came to his senses and said that he needed coffee and said to buy it at the coffee shop they visited yesterday. The guards looked at each other in confusion but drove off. Matthew was cleaning the cafe, while his manager drooped from the fact that there were no visitors in the cafe. Suddenly, 4 men in black entered the cafe, one of whom Matthew recognized as Jin. He ordered 1 latte and told the guards to get something too. The head was delighted with the visitors and invited them to sit down. He flattered the manager about the taste of their coffee, although when he tasted his latte, he almost spit it out. Matthew asked him why he came again, to which Jin said that the green-eyed one wanted to meet him again, to which Matthew grabbed Jin's hand and said that he himself wanted to find him, not knowing either his place of work or his last name. He asked Jin to be his model for the sculpture. He asked him to pose in the nude, and was even ready to pay, to which Jin only laughed at the fact that Matthew thought he needed money, and the green-eyed man suggested that he ask for anything. Whatever Jin wanted, he would give him everything. Jin told him that such phrases should not be thrown around, but agreed. They left the cafe and walked down the narrow street. Jin asked where Matthew's house was, to which he replied that construction work was underway there for reconstruction, and because of this, he lives in a workshop. Since he was a student at a fine arts university, Jin thought he was from a good and wealthy family. However, it turned out that, on the contrary, from the poor, and his father was also engaged in art. What about your family? Jin asked. I don't have it, Matthew replied. Suddenly Jin was flooded with old memories of how he lived before, how they, with his guards, were starving and saving on everything, how they tried to get out of these gray streets closer to the skyscrapers. They came to Matthew's workshop. It was a cellar in which there were clay sculptures floored with rags. There were different easels and paints. As they made their way down the stairs, Matthew asked Jin to wait to bring in his portfolio. At first, Jin thought about not agreeing to the request to be a model for this boy. I thought to have some fun, and then bend over. After all, at first he thought that Matthew was an inept student with a low level of skill, but even in his opinion, a person far from the world of art, he was very good. Most of his work illustrated nude men, and although they openly depicted the human body, they did not look like films for adults. From his work it rather blew gloominess and dank cold. Do not you like it? Asked Matthew why Jin slammed the portfolio, and asked why he chose him as a model. He explained that he thought he was dreaming when he met Jin. He simply could not believe that he saw in front of him a person who perfectly matched his criteria. He wanted to embody his image in sculpture in a form that would remain forever unchanged. Jin said that he has his own conditions for this. Firstly, while he will pose for him as a model, Matthew will obey everything he says. Then he unbuckled his belt and said that this time Matthew should do everything with his eyes closed. When he took off his glasses, Jin noticed that Matthew was much more of his type than he thought. Blindfolding his eyes, he took his hand, to which Matthew asked, if I'm blindfolded, how will I work? To which Jin took his hand and put it on his abs. Matthew was speechless. What drove Jin now was pure curiosity about the boy in front of him. He's clearly not one of the experienced people. His reactions were honest, and he obeyed Jin well as he took his hand and led him down his abs. And then Matthew said, I'm afraid this method will be ineffective. After all, the most suitable option is to start with a photograph or a sketch. Working with your eyes closed is a waste of time. Jin stood completely unimpressed by Matthew's words, and by the fact that he did not pick up a single hint. But Jin did not let up, and continued to seduce the guy. He took off his shirt and put his hand on his abs, to which he finally got a response. Matthew pushed him onto the couch and told him to undress. But they didn't get to the point, because Matthew really touched his body in order to mold the sculpture. Jin was starting to get fed up with this, but he tried to control himself. Out of boredom, Jin began to ask Matthew about how much money he rents this apartment and education, because he said that he had no parents, to which Matthew replied that he was receiving a scholarship and found this apartment through friends, so it cost him less. Jin suddenly became interested in how Matthew started sculpting, and he began his story about when a rabbit was once brought to the orphanage, and people crowded around him, but due to developmental retardation, it was difficult for him to ask him to pet him. So, when he waited for the interest of other children to subside, he decided to touch it. But the person who brought the rabbit did not like it, and Matthew could not do it. Therefore, for a child who wanted a rabbit, this was an occasion to mold a figurine of this animal from clay. Matthew, having finished his story, also decided to ask Jin where the scar on his back came from, to which Jin was furious and said that he could not ask him about something personal, and added that there could be nothing similar to him in the sculpture, no details or scars. Tired of the fact that his body was simply being touched, he took Matthew by the head and planted it on himself. During the process, he received a call and was called to the head, but he ignored it and hung up, saying that he would run tomorrow. But before they had time to continue, they called him again and said to be in the office in 30 minutes. Neither the manager would be even more disappointed in him. Dropping the phone, he jumped up from the couch and began to get ready, leaving Matthew to deal with his problem alone. Matthew apologized to him for not being able to bring him to the peak, and said that this would not happen again because he was one of those who learn quickly. Jin was very amused by his desire, but he said that they would meet in his workshop every Friday, and Matthew would no longer be able to tell that this was his first time. Thanks for watching, subscribe to the channel and like this video.